Rain hammered the dirt path as Elena Whitmore ran through the trees with a lantern shaking in her hand. Thunder cracked so close that the ground seemed to jump under her boots. She was not supposed to be out here. Not tonight, not with the storm tearing branches from the old oaks, not with her 2 children asleep back at the cottage under the care of a neighbor. But the strange howling she had heard from her window, followed by a heavy silence, would not let her rest. Something was wrong in these woods, and she could not simply close her eyes and pretend she had not heard it. She pushed through wet ferns and stopped when her lantern light hit something dark lying at the base of a fallen tree. At first she thought it was a deer struck by a passing wagon, then she saw the shape of a hand, fingers curled into the mud, and her heart slammed against her ribs. "Hello?" she called, her voice swallowed by the rain. "Can you hear me?" She rushed closer and knelt beside the still body of a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his shirt was torn at the side, dark with blood that the rain was steadily washing away. His face was turned from her, hidden beneath wet strands of hair, but his chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. He was alive. Barely. Elena had spent her whole life learning how to survive on very little, how to fix wounds with whatever cloth she had, how to move quickly and decide quickly, because hesitation cost more than most people realized. She did not know who this man was or why he was bleeding in the middle of a forest during a storm, and for a moment fear rooted her to the spot. What if the people who hurt him were still nearby? What if helping him put her in danger too? But then he groaned, a small broken sound, and something in her chest simply refused to let her turn away. "Stay with me," she whispered, tucking the lantern into the crook of her arm as she rolled him gently onto his back. "I am not leaving you here." The moment the light landed fully on his face, her breath caught. She knew him. Not his name, not where he came from, but she knew that face. The sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lips parted slightly when he breathed. She had seen this face every single day for the past 3 years, in the eyes of her twin children. 5 years ago she had spent one unforgettable night with a stranger who had appeared in her village out of nowhere, kind and quiet and gone before the sun rose. She never learned his name. She never saw him again, and 9 months later, she had given birth to 2 children who carried his features stamped clearly onto their small faces. Now here he was, bleeding, unconscious, in the middle of a forest that had nothing to do with the village where they had once met. "No," she breathed, shaking her head as if that could undo what her eyes were telling her. It cannot be. But it was. The universe, it seemed, was not finished with her yet. She had no time to sit and wonder at fate. His skin was growing cold, and the rain would kill him faster than his wounds if she did not act. Elena wedged her shoulder under his arm and heaved with everything she had, dragging him a few inches at a time toward the narrow path that led back to her cottage. He was heavy, all muscle and unconscious weight, and twice she nearly slipped in the mud and lost her grip. Her arms burned. Her knees scraped against roots hidden beneath the wet leaves, but she kept going, because stopping was not something she allowed herself to consider. Somewhere behind her, deep in the trees, a branch snapped. Elena froze, her pulse roaring in her ears. She turned her head slowly, lantern raised, searching the black spaces between the trunks. For a long moment there was nothing but rain and wind. Then, far off, she thought she saw a pair of eyes catch the light, low to the ground, unnaturally still. A chill crawled up her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. Just an animal, she told herself, though her voice did not sound convinced. Just an animal. She did not wait to find out. She pulled the wounded stranger the rest of the way with a strength she did not know she had, her lungs burning, her mind repeating the same silent prayer. Almost there, almost there. By the time she reached her cottage, her arms felt as though they belonged to someone else. She kicked the door open and dragged him inside, then slammed it shut and threw the old iron bolt across. Though she could not have said what exactly she thought would keep danger out. The single room was warm from the dying fire in the hearth, and in the corner, on a small cot, her twins slept soundly, unaware that their long-lost father lay bleeding on their mother's floor only a few feet away. Elena looked at her children, at the tiny curled fists and the soft, steady rise and fall of their breathing, and then back at the man on the ground. Their features were undeniable, laid out clearly in the firelight. Leo's stubborn jaw, Vera's straight dark brows. Both of them carried pieces of this stranger like a signature written across their faces. "Who are you?" she whispered, kneeling beside him again. "And why did the world bring you back to me like this?" She had no answers, only a racing heart and a task in front of her. She tore strips from an old sheet and pressed them against the wound at his side, wincing at how deep the cut ran along his ribs. It did not look like something made by a knife or an animal claw exactly, though she could not place what had caused it. She cleaned it as best she could with warm water from the kettle still simmering over the coals, her hands moving with practiced steadiness even as her mind spun in circles. He stirred once, his brow tightening, a low sound escaping his throat that was almost a name, though she could not make out the word. She leaned closer. "You are safe now," she said softly, though she did not fully believe it herself. "Whatever happened out there, it is over. Just breathe." His eyelids fluttered, dark lashes trembling, but they did not open. Elena wrapped the wound tightly, then pulled a wool blanket from her own bed and laid it over him, tucking it around his shoulders the way she might for one of her children on a cold night. It was strange, caring for a man who was practically a stranger and yet felt achingly familiar all at once. Outside the storm raged on, rattling the shutters, but inside the cottage there was a fragile kind of stillness. Elena sat back on her heels and studied his face in the firelight, searching it for something, some clue to explain how a single night 5 years ago had led to this exact moment. She noticed something then, a faint mark on his shoulder, just below the collarbone, mostly hidden beneath his torn shirt. It looked almost like a symbol, intricate lines curling into a shape she did not recognize, the skin around it slightly raised as though it had been there since birth rather than drawn on. She did not know what it meant, she only knew it made the strange chill from the forest return, crawling along her arms despite the warmth of the fire. A soft whimper came from the cot. Vera had turned in her sleep, one small hand reaching out toward nothing. Elena rose quickly and smoothed her daughter's hair, whispering gentle words until she settled again. When she turned back, the stranger's eyes were open. They were dark, almost black in the low light, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath stop in her throat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain drummed steadily on the roof, the fire crackled, and the man who had vanished from her life 5 years ago stared at her as though she were something impossible, something he had given up hoping to ever see again. "You," he rasped, his voice rough and broken, barely more than a whisper. "It is really you." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for a cup of water, unsure whether to feel relief that he was awake or fear at what his words might mean. "Do not try to talk," she said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was pounding wildly. "You are badly hurt, just rest." But his gaze had already slid past her, toward the small cot in the corner, toward the 2 sleeping children whose faces mirrored his own so closely that there could be no mistake, no coincidence, no explanation except the truth neither of them had said aloud yet. His lips parted. Whatever he was about to say was lost as his eyes rolled back and the darkness pulled him under again, leaving Elena alone with her racing thoughts, her sleeping twins, and a wounded stranger whose sudden return promised nothing but more questions, and perhaps more danger than she could yet imagine. She sat beside him through what remained of the night, refusing to let herself drift off despite her exhaustion, watching his chest rise and fall, listening for any sound from outside the walls. Twice more she thought she heard something moving beyond the tree line, a soft scrape, a low sound almost like breathing, but each time she checked the shuttered window, there was nothing but rain and darkness staring back. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through the cracks in the shutters, Elena had cleaned his wound twice more and changed the bandages once. He had not woken again, but his breathing had steadied, and the color had slowly returned to his face. She allowed herself, finally, a small measure of relief. Whoever he was, whatever secrets he carried beneath that strange mark on his shoulder, one truth remained unavoidable. Fate had dragged him back into her life at the worst possible moment, wounded and vulnerable, right into the home where his own children slept without any knowledge of who their father truly was. And somewhere out in those dark, rain-soaked woods, something had been watching, something that, Elena feared, would not simply give up and disappear with the storm. She glanced once more at the mysterious symbol on his shoulder, then at her sleeping twins, and felt a cold certainty settle over her. This was only the beginning of something far bigger than a wounded stranger and a stormy night, and she had no idea yet just how much her quiet, careful life was about to change forever. Morning light spread slowly across the small cottage, but Elena barely noticed the change from gray to gold. She had not slept. Every muscle in her body ached from dragging the wounded stranger through the forest, yet her mind refused to rest, circling endlessly around his face, his silence, and the mark on his shoulder that still troubled her more than she wanted to admit. The twins woke not long after sunrise, tumbling off their cot with the boundless energy only small children seem to possess. Leo spotted the stranger first and froze mid-step, his small hand gripping his sister's sleeve. "Mama," he whispered, eyes wide. "Who is that?" Elena crouched quickly and gathered both children into her arms before they could get too close. "A traveler," she said gently. "He was hurt in the storm last night. He is resting now." Vera peeked around her mother's shoulder, studying the man's face with the unashamed curiosity only a child could manage. "He looks like Leo," she said simply, as though stating an obvious fact about the weather. Elena's chest tightened, but she forced a small smile. "Many people look alike, sweetheart. Now come, let us get you both something to eat before I need to leave for the estate." She ushered the children to the small table, doing her best to keep her hands steady as she prepared a simple breakfast of bread and warm milk. Her mind kept drifting back to the man lying across the room, to the low, ragged sound of his breathing, to the single word he had whispered before losing consciousness again. "You. It is really you." As if he had known her instantly, as if 5 years apart had done nothing to dull his memory of her face. She could not decide which frightened her more, the possibility that he was simply a wounded stranger who resembled a man from her past by cruel coincidence, or the possibility that he truly was the same man, returned without warning, without explanation, and bleeding from a wound she still did not understand. By mid-morning, the man's condition had improved enough that his breathing sounded steady and even. Elena knelt beside him again to check the bandage at his side, relieved to see that the bleeding had finally stopped completely. As she worked, his eyes opened once more, calmer this time, more aware. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice still rough but stronger than the night before. Elena kept her eyes on the bandage, unwilling to look at him directly just yet. "I could not leave you out there," she answered simply. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone," he said. "Not in these times." Something in the way he said it, low and heavy with meaning she could not fully grasp, made her glance up despite herself. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, though she could not tell whether it was fear or something else entirely stirring beneath her ribs. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Out there in the woods. Who did this?" A flicker of something crossed his face, gone before she could name it. "Rogue attackers," he said carefully. "I was traveling alone and was ambushed. I do not remember much beyond that." It was a simple enough explanation, and yet something about the careful way he chose his words told her there was more he was not saying. She decided not to press further, not yet. He was still weak, and she had children to care for, and a household of duties waiting for her at the estate where she worked. "I have to go soon," she said, rising to her feet. "I work at the manor on the hill. I cannot afford to lose my position, not with 2 children depending on me." "2 children," he repeated softly, his gaze drifting toward the corner where Leo and Vera were now quietly playing with a set of carved wooden animals. His expression shifted into something unreadable, something that looked almost like pain layered beneath careful control. "How old are they?" "They will turn 5 next spring," Elena answered, watching him closely. He said nothing for a long moment, simply staring at the twins as though committing every detail of their faces to memory. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he said, 5 years. Elena's heart stuttered. It was not a question. It was recognition. Whatever doubts she had been trying to hold on to crumbled a little further in that instant. "What is your name?" she asked, deciding it was time to stop tiptoeing around the truth neither of them had spoken aloud. He hesitated, and in that hesitation she saw the flicker of a man choosing his next words with great care. "Kellen," he finally said. "My name is Kellen." It was not a lie, at least not entirely, though he offered no family name, no explanation of where he came from, or where he had been these past 5 years. Elena studied him, searching his face for the truth she suspected he was withholding, but exhaustion and pain still clouded his features, and she did not have the heart to push a wounded man for answers he clearly was not ready to give. "I am Elena," she said instead. "And these are my children, Leo and Vera." At the sound of their names, both twins looked up from their toys. Vera, ever bold, abandoned her wooden animals entirely, and marched over to where Kellen lay, studying him with the fearless directness only small children possessed. "Are you going to stay?" she asked. Kellen's throat worked visibly as he swallowed, his composure cracking just slightly at the sight of his daughter standing so close, so unaware of who he truly was to her. "Only until I am well enough to travel," he said gently. "I do not wish to be a burden to your mother." "You are not a burden," Elena said quickly, surprising even herself with how easily the words came. "Just rest. I will bring more food before I leave, and my neighbor will look in on you and the children while I am at the estate." She busied herself preparing a simple meal, aware the entire time of Kellen's gaze following her movements, of the strange charged silence stretching between them, filled with everything neither of them was yet willing to say. As she worked, her thoughts churned. Who was he truly? What kind of man traveled alone through dangerous forests, carrying a strange mark and offering only half answers about how he had come to be so badly wounded? And why, despite every warning bell ringing in her mind, did some quiet part of her still feel a pull toward him that 5 years of separation had failed to erase? When it was finally time for her to leave for the estate, she knelt beside her children and reminded them to behave for the neighbor, kissing each of their foreheads before rising. At the door, she paused and glanced back at Kellen, who was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, somewhere between gratitude and quiet sorrow. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." "Rest," she replied simply, and stepped out into the cool morning air, though her mind remained firmly back inside that small cottage, wrestling with questions she was not sure she truly wanted answered. The walk to the estate took nearly half an hour along a winding dirt road bordered by tall hedges, and Elena used every minute of it trying to steady her thoughts before she arrived. The manor belonged to a wealthy widow named Grace Ellery, a sharp-eyed woman who ran her household with strict efficiency and very little patience for distraction among her staff. Elena had worked there for almost 3 years, ever since the twins were born, and she had always prided herself on never bringing her personal troubles through the servants' entrance. Today, though, focus proved difficult. She moved through her morning duties, dusting the long hallways and preparing the dining room for breakfast, her mind replaying the moment Kellen's eyes had opened and fixed on her with such raw recognition. She thought of the strange mark on his shoulder, the careful way he avoided certain questions, the odd formality in his speech that did not quite match a simple traveler's manner. "Elena." She startled at the sound of her name, and turned to find Grace Ellery standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her sharp gaze studying her closely. "Yes, ma'am? You seem distracted this morning," Grace said, not unkindly, though her tone carried its usual note of authority. "Is everything well at home?" Elena forced a smile, smoothing her apron with hands that were not quite as steady as she wanted them to be. "Everything is fine, ma'am. I apologize for my distraction. It will not happen again." Grace studied her a moment longer, clearly unconvinced, but did not press further. "See that it does not. We have guests arriving this evening, and I expect the household to run smoothly." "Yes, ma'am," Elena said, relieved when Grace turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the polished floor. She spent the rest of the day trying to bury her worries beneath work, scrubbing floors and folding linens with an intensity that left her hands raw by evening. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, her thoughts kept drifting back to the cottage, to the wounded man resting there, to the strange fear that had gripped her the previous night, when she thought she saw eyes watching from the tree line. By the time her shift ended and she made the walk home beneath a sky streaked orange and pink with sunset, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders, but so did anticipation. She quickened her pace, eager despite herself to see whether Kellen's condition had improved, eager to learn more about the man who had walked back into her life so suddenly, carrying secrets she was only beginning to sense the shape of. When she reached her cottage, her neighbor, an older widow named Margaret, met her at the door with a curious expression. "He is a strange one, that traveler of yours," Margaret said quietly, glancing back toward the cottage. "Barely said a word all day, but he watched those children of yours like they were the only thing keeping him tethered to this world." Elena's stomach tightened at the observation, but she simply thanked Margaret for her help and stepped inside, steadying herself before facing whatever waited within. Kellen was sitting up now, propped against the wall near the fire, considerably stronger than he had been that morning, his color much improved. Leo sat cross-legged beside him, chattering happily about some game he had invented, while Vera lay curled nearby, half asleep against a folded blanket. The sight struck Elena somewhere deep and unguarded, a father and his children together for what might have been the very first time, even if only 2 of the 3 people in that scene understood the truth of their connection. Kellen looked up when she entered, and for a moment something passed between them, unspoken and heavy, before he offered her a small, tired smile. "They are remarkable children," he said softly. "They are," Elena agreed, setting down her basket and moving to gather Vera into her arms. "Kellen, we need to talk, properly, once they are asleep." His expression shifted, wariness flickering behind his eyes, but he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "I suppose we do." Elena settled the children for the night, humming softly until their breathing evened into sleep, all the while aware of Kellen watching from across the room, waiting, perhaps as anxious as she was for the conversation neither of them could avoid any longer. Whatever answers he gave tonight, she suspected they would change everything she thought she understood about the man she had once shared a single unforgettable night with, and about the strange, dangerous world he seemed to be carefully hiding from her. The fire had burned low by the time Elena finally sat down across from Kellen, the small room quiet except for the soft crackle of embers and the steady breathing of her sleeping children. She wrapped her arms around her knees, studying the man who had once vanished from her life, without a single word of explanation, and who now sat before her carrying wounds and secrets in equal measure. 5 years ago, she began quietly, a man appeared in my village. He never gave his full name. He stayed one night, and by morning he was gone, as if he had never existed at all. Kellen's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the flames rather than on her. I remember every detail of that night, he said, more than you could possibly know. Then why did you leave? The question came out sharper than she intended. Years of buried hurt finally finding a voice. Why disappear without a word, without any way for me to find you, and now appear again half dead in the woods behind my home? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched against his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy with something that sounded like guilt. Because staying would have put you in danger. Because who I am, what I carry, follows me wherever I go, and I could not risk it touching you. Elena's frustration flared. That is not an answer, Kellen. That is an excuse. Do you have any idea what it was like, raising 2 children alone, not knowing where their father was, not even knowing his true name? I know, he said, and the pain in his voice was raw enough that she almost softened despite herself. I have thought of nothing else for 5 years. I told myself leaving was protection. I told myself it was the right choice. But watching those children sleep in that corner, knowing I missed every single day of their lives, I am no longer certain any reason could justify what I did. Silence stretched between them, filled with everything unsaid. Elena studied his face, searching for the lie she half expected to find, but there was only exhaustion and sincerity staring back at her. Who are you truly? She asked finally. Not Kellen the traveler. Not Kellen the man attacked by rogues in the forest. Who are you really? His eyes met hers, dark and steady, and for a moment she thought he might finally tell her everything. Then something shifted in his expression, a wall sliding back into place, careful and deliberate. Someone with enemies, he said quietly. Someone whose past has a way of finding him no matter how far he runs. I promise you, Elena, I will explain everything in time, but some truths, once spoken, cannot be unheard, and I need to know you and the children will be protected before I risk placing that burden on you. It was not the answer she wanted, but something in his tone told her pressing further tonight would accomplish nothing except pushing him further behind his careful walls. She let out a slow breath, glancing toward the sleeping twins. They deserve to know their father, she said softly. Whoever you are underneath all these secrets. I want nothing more, Kellen answered, his voice thick with emotion, than to be the father they deserve. Give me time, Elena. Let me heal. Let me prove myself worthy of standing in their lives, and I will tell you everything. I swear it. She studied him a moment longer, weighing his sincerity against the caution every instinct urged her to maintain. Finally, she nodded slowly. Time, she agreed. But do not mistake my patience for blindness. I will find the truth eventually, Kellen, with or without your help. A faint, tired smile crossed his lips. I would expect nothing less from you. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Kellen's strength returned steadily, his wound healing far faster than Elena would have expected for an injury so severe, though she chose not to question it too closely, still uncertain what she truly wanted to know. He began helping quietly around the cottage while she was away at the estate, mending the roof, chopping wood, fixing the loose hinge on the door that had bothered her for months. Margaret reported each evening that he spent most of his time with the twins, patient and gentle despite his obvious unfamiliarity with the everyday routines of caring for small children. One afternoon, returning early from the estate after Grace granted the staff a rare half-day, Elena arrived home to find Kellen sitting on the ground outside the cottage, Leo and Vera perched on either side of him, all three watching intently as he carefully carved a small wooden bird with a knife. Careful with the blade, he murmured to Leo, guiding the boy's small hands with patient precision. Let the wood tell you where the shape wants to go. Vera clapped delightedly as the rough outline of wings began to emerge from the block of wood. Papa is so clever, she said brightly. Elena froze at the edge of the yard, her breath catching in her throat. She had not told the children who Kellen truly was, had been careful to avoid any suggestion of the word father in their presence, yet somehow Vera had reached the conclusion entirely on her own. Drawn perhaps by some instinct children seemed to possess for truths adults tried carefully to hide. Kellen's hands stilled instantly, his gaze flying to Elena's face, searching for her reaction, clearly unsure whether to correct his daughter's assumption or allow the moment to stand. Elena's heart pounded, torn between the urge to protect her children from a truth she barely understood herself, and the quiet, undeniable rightness of the scene unfolding before her. He is a very clever friend, she said carefully, stepping forward and forcing a light tone into her voice, though her eyes never left Kellen's. Vera frowned, clearly unconvinced, but did not press the matter further, returning her attention instead to the half-finished wooden bird. Kellen exhaled slowly, something like relief and disappointment mingling in his expression as he resumed carving, his movements slightly less steady than before. Later that night, once the children were asleep, Elena found Kellen sitting outside beneath the stars, his wound now fully closed, leaving only a faint pale scar along his ribs. She settled beside him, pulling her shawl tighter against the cool evening air. "She called you Papa today," she said quietly. Kellen's throat worked visibly. "I heard. It frightened me," Elena admitted. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so easily right. As though some part of her already knew, even without being told. "Children see truths adults spend years learning to hide," Kellen murmured, his gaze fixed on the stars scattered across the dark sky. "I have wanted to claim that word since the moment I woke and saw their faces. But claiming it means accepting everything that comes with who I am, and I am not yet certain the world I come from is safe enough to welcome them into." "Then tell me about that world," Elena said, turning to study his profile in the moonlight. "Enough riddles, Kellen. I have earned that much at least." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful, weighed down by the gravity of words he had clearly held back far too long. "There are things about me, about my family, that most people would find impossible to believe. Powers passed down through generations. Enemies who would see my bloodline ended entirely if given the chance. The attack that left me wounded in these woods was not random. It was deliberate, meant to end my life before I could ever return to claim what waits for me." Elena's breath caught, fear and confusion tangling together in her chest. "Return to claim what?" Kellen turned to face her fully, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse race. "My throne," he said quietly. "And, if you will allow it, my family." The words hung in the cool night air between them. Impossible and yet somehow, given everything she had witnessed over these past days, entirely believable. Elena stared at him, 1,000 questions crowding her mind at once, uncertain which to voice first, uncertain whether the ground beneath her carefully ordinary life had just shifted permanently beneath her feet. "A throne," she repeated slowly. "Kellen, what exactly are you?" His expression grew solemn, almost pained, as though the answer itself carried a weight he had spent years trying to shield her from. "Something far more dangerous than the man you remember from 5 years ago," he said quietly. "And something I fear may have already brought danger straight to your door." As if summoned by his words, a low, distant howl rose from somewhere deep in the surrounding hills, carried on the night wind, unmistakably close enough to send a shiver of unease crawling down Elena's spine. Kellen's entire body went rigid beside her, his gaze snapping toward the tree line with a sharpness that confirmed every fear she had been trying desperately not to acknowledge. Whatever secrets he had been protecting her from, it seemed their time for careful, gentle revelations had just run out far sooner than either of them was prepared for. The howl faded into the night, but its echo lingered long after the sound itself had gone silent. Kellen rose to his feet in one swift motion, his earlier weakness seeming to vanish entirely, as his eyes scanned the dark tree line with an intensity that startled Elena. "Get inside," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority she had not heard from him before, steady and commanding in a way that left no room for argument. "Now, Elena." She did not question him. Something in his tone told her this was not the moment for more explanations. She hurried inside, bolting the door behind them both, and immediately checked on the children, who thankfully remained fast asleep, undisturbed by the sound that had sent her heart hammering. Kellen stood near the shuttered window, peering carefully through a narrow gap, his shoulders tense, every muscle coiled and ready. Minutes passed in tense silence before he finally exhaled and stepped back, some of the tension easing from his frame. "It is gone," he said. "For now." "What was that?" Elena demanded, her voice barely above a whisper so as not to wake the twins. "Kellen, tell me the truth, all of it. I cannot protect my children from a danger I do not understand." He turned to face her fully, and for the first time since she had found him bleeding in the forest, his expression held nothing guarded, nothing careful. Only exhaustion and a kind of resigned honesty that told her the moment for half-truths had finally passed. "My name is Kellen Ashbourne," he said quietly. "I am the ruling alpha of the Northern Pax, leader of a kingdom you would never have heard of, hidden from ordinary life by choice and by necessity. 5 years ago I traveled far from my territory, disguised as an ordinary man, hoping for a single night where no one expected anything of me, where I was simply a person rather than a king burdened by duty." Elena's mind reeled, struggling to fit his words into any framework she understood. A kingdom, she repeated slowly. Of what exactly? Wolves, Kellen said simply, not ordinary wolves. My people carry the ability to shift between human and wolf forms, a gift and a burden passed down through bloodlines stretching back centuries. I am the strongest among them, chosen by birth and by strength to lead. That mark you saw on my shoulder marks me as Alpha King, a symbol only the ruling bloodline carries. For a long moment, Elena simply stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate joke, some explanation that made sense within the ordinary world she had always known. But Kellen's expression remained solemn, utterly sincere. And slowly, piece by piece, everything she had witnessed over the past days began arranging itself into a shape that made a terrifying kind of sense. His unnaturally fast healing, the strange formality beneath his simple traveler's disguise, the mark that resembled nothing she had ever seen, the distant howl that had sent him into instant, commanding alertness. You are telling me, she said slowly, testing each word before speaking it aloud, that you are some kind of king, a king of wolves. Yes, Kellen said simply. And the attack that left you wounded in the forest. His expression darkened. A rival faction within my own territories, led by a man named Alaric Voss, has spent years attempting to seize control of the northern packs. He believes my bloodline grows weak, unfit to rule, and has made several attempts on my life over recent months. The attack that brought me to your doorstep was his most recent effort, and very nearly his most successful. Elena's hand rose unconsciously to her mouth, horror and understanding tangling together as the full weight of his words settled over her. And if he learns about Leo and Vera, she whispered, about children who share your bloodline, they become targets, Kellen finished grimly, his jaw tightening with barely restrained fury. Heirs to a throne Alaric desperately wants for himself. If he discovers their existence, he will not hesitate to see them eliminated before they ever have the chance to grow into their birthright. The fear that gripped Elena in that moment was unlike anything she had experienced before, sharp and immediate, cutting through every lingering doubt about whether Kellen's story could possibly be true. She glanced toward the corner where her children slept peacefully, utterly unaware of the danger that had apparently followed their father straight into their quiet, ordinary lives. Then we protect them, she said firmly, turning back to face Kellen with a determination that matched the fierce protective instinct rising within her. Whatever it takes. I do not care about kingdoms or crowns, Kellen. I care about keeping my children safe. Something in Kellen's expression shifted at her words, a flicker of something that looked almost like awe mixed with profound relief. I expected fear, he admitted quietly. Rejection, perhaps, once you learned the truth of what I am, not this. Fear will not keep them safe, Elena said simply. Action will. Now tell me everything, Kellen. What does this Alaric look like? How does he plan to find you? What can we do to keep him away from this cottage? Over the next hour, Kellen explained as much as he dared, careful to keep his voice low enough not to wake the children. He described the structure of his territories, the loyalty of most of his people, the small but dangerous faction that supported Alaric's ambitions. He explained that his warriors would already be searching for him, alerted by his prolonged absence, and that finding him alive would bring both relief and renewed danger, since his location would inevitably become known to those still hunting him. I need to return to my territory soon, he said finally, guilt heavy in his voice, to reclaim my throne properly and root out the threat Alaric poses before it grows any larger. But I cannot simply vanish from your lives again, not after everything I have learned these past days. Then do not vanish, Elena said simply. Heal fully first. Let your people know you are alive and safe, and when the time comes, we will decide together what comes next, for all of us. Kellen studied her for a long moment, something soft and searching in his gaze. You would consider joining that world? Knowing everything it demands, everything it risks? Elena hesitated, uncertain herself, torn between the quiet, ordinary life she had built for her children, and the undeniable truth that their father, whether she liked it or not, belonged to something far larger and more dangerous than either of them had ever imagined. I do not know yet, she admitted honestly, but I know I will not send you away simply to avoid difficult questions, not when our children's safety depends on facing them directly. A faint, grateful smile touched Kellen's lips, though worry still shadowed his eyes. Then we face them together, he said quietly, starting tomorrow. I need to send word to my most trusted advisor, a woman named Odette, who will know how to proceed carefully without drawing unwanted attention. How will you send word? Elena asked, without revealing your location to the wrong people. Carefully, Kellen said, a hint of his old confidence returning to his voice. I still have allies who understand the meaning of discretion. They spent the rest of that night in quiet conversation. Kellen revealing pieces of his world carefully, testing Elena's reactions, watching for any sign of the fear he clearly expected but did not find. By the time exhaustion finally pulled them both toward sleep, something had shifted between them, a fragile trust rebuilding itself from the ashes of 5 years' separation, forged now under the shadow of a danger neither of them could afford to underestimate. Elena lay awake long after Kellen finally drifted into an uneasy rest near the fire, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, steady breathing of her children in the corner. Everything she thought she understood about her quiet, careful life had shattered within the span of a single storm, replaced by kingdoms and crowns and enemies who hunted royal bloodlines through dark forests. And yet, despite the fear coiling tightly in her chest, she found herself unable to regret the choice she had made that stormy night, dragging a wounded stranger through the rain rather than leaving him to die alone. Whatever came next, whatever dangers Alaric Voss and his faction intended to bring to her doorstep, Elena understood with sudden, absolute clarity that she would face every bit of it, for the sake of the twins sleeping peacefully in the corner, and perhaps, though she was not yet ready to admit it fully to herself, for the sake of the wounded king who had somehow found his way back into her heart, as easily as he had once, years ago, stolen it entirely. A week passed in careful, guarded routine. Kellen's strength returned fully, the last traces of his wound fading into nothing more than a thin silver scar along his ribs, and with his recovery came a growing restlessness Elena recognized as the pull of duties waiting far beyond the quiet borders of her small cottage. He had sent word, discreetly, through a method he refused to explain in detail, and though no reply had yet come, he assured her his advisor Odette would move carefully to avoid drawing dangerous attention. At the estate, Elena's distraction had not gone unnoticed. Grace Ellery watched her with increasing scrutiny, sharp eyes narrowing whenever Elena's mind wandered mid-task or her hands paused too long over some simple chore. "You have changed these past weeks," Grace observed one afternoon, catching Elena staring blankly out a window while she should have been polishing silver. "Is there a man involved?" Elena's cheeks warmed despite herself. "Nothing of concern, ma'am." Grace's expression remained skeptical, but she said nothing further, though Elena noticed the older woman's gaze lingering thoughtfully in her direction more than once throughout the following days. Word traveled quickly in small communities, and though Elena had done her best to keep Kellen's presence quiet, whispers had begun circulating among the other estate staff about a mysterious stranger seen occasionally near her cottage. "They say he barely leaves the house," one of the younger maids, a girl named Iris, whispered during their shared afternoon break, "and that he carries himself like someone far more important than an ordinary traveler." Elena kept her expression carefully neutral. "He is simply recovering from an injury. Nothing more." Iris studied her with poorly concealed curiosity but let the matter drop, though Elena understood the gossip would not simply disappear on its own. She hurried home that evening with growing unease, uncertain how much longer they could maintain the careful secrecy Kellen's safety depended upon. She found him in the small yard behind the cottage, teaching Leo how to identify different bird calls, his patience with the boy remarkable given how little practice he clearly had with such ordinary domestic moments. Vera sat nearby, weaving a crown of wildflowers with fierce concentration, occasionally glancing up to add her own opinions to whatever conversation her brother and Kellen were having. "The staff at the estate are talking," Elena said quietly once the children had wandered off to chase a butterfly through the tall grass. "About a mysterious stranger staying at my cottage. Grace has noticed my distraction as well." Kellen's expression grew serious, the easy warmth from moments before replaced by careful calculation. "How much do they know?" "Nothing certain," Elena admitted, "only that someone unusual has been seen near my home. But gossip has a way of growing legs of its own, Kellen. If word travels far enough, it could reach ears far more dangerous than curious housemaids." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight with concern. "I need to move more carefully. Perhaps I should relocate somewhere less visible until Odette responds." "No," Elena said quickly, surprising herself with the immediacy of her refusal. "Leaving now would only raise more questions, and I refuse to send you away again without knowing you are truly safe. We simply need to be more careful. Fewer visits from Margaret. No unnecessary trips outside during daylight." Kellen studied her for a long moment, something soft passing behind his dark eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Elena. Most would have demanded I leave the moment danger became a possibility. Most have not spent 5 years wondering what became of the father of their children," Elena replied simply. "I am done running from difficult truths, Kellen. We manage this together, carefully, until your people can properly protect us all." That evening, after the children were settled for the night, a soft knock sounded at the cottage door, cautious and deliberate. Kellen's entire body tensed instantly, his eyes flashing toward Elena with silent warning before he moved toward the door with the fluid, predatory grace she had come to recognize as entirely unlike an ordinary man's movements. "Who is it?" he called quietly, positioning himself carefully between the door and where Elena stood. "A friend of the northern hunter," came a woman's voice, low and careful, clearly chosen to sound harmless to any who might overhear yet carrying unmistakable meaning to Kellen, whose shoulders relaxed slightly at the coded phrase. He opened the door cautiously to reveal a woman wrapped in a plain traveling cloak, her sharp eyes immediately sweeping the small room, before settling on Kellen with visible relief. "Your Grace," she breathed, stepping inside quickly once Kellen gestured her forward. "When your message reached me, I feared the worst. Alaric's scouts have been searching every territory bordering the southern woods for weeks now." "Odette," Kellen said, and Elena recognized instant relief in his voice, the tension of the past days finally easing slightly at the sight of someone he clearly trusted completely. "Thank the stars you came yourself rather than risking a messenger." Odette's gaze slid toward Elena, curious and assessing, though not unkind. "And this must be the woman your letter mentioned." "Elena," Kellen said, gesturing between them, "this is Odette, my most trusted advisor, and one of very few people who know the full truth of what happened 5 years ago." Odette inclined her head respectfully toward Elena, though her expression remained carefully guarded, the look of someone accustomed to weighing every situation for potential danger before allowing herself to relax. "It is an honor," she said simply, "though I confess I have many questions about how exactly you managed to keep His Majesty alive and hidden this long without proper training in such matters." "Determination mostly," Elena replied, a hint of dry humor slipping into her tone despite the tension of the moment. A faint, approving smile touched Odette's lips before her expression grew serious once more. "We do not have much time. Alaric has grown bold in your absence, spreading rumors throughout the packs that you abandoned your throne willingly, perhaps even that you are dead. Several border territories have begun questioning their loyalty, uncertain whether to trust a leader who vanished so completely." Kellen's expression darkened with barely restrained anger. "Then it is past time I return to correct such lies." "Not yet," Odette said quickly, glancing meaningfully toward Elena and, beyond her, toward the corner where the sleeping twins lay hidden beneath their blankets. "Returning now, before we understand the full extent of Alaric's influence, risks walking directly into whatever trap he has surely prepared. We need to move carefully, gathering information before revealing your survival to anyone beyond those we trust completely. And in the meantime," Kellen said, glancing toward Elena with obvious concern, "what of their safety? Alaric's scouts search these very woods." Odette's expression grew grave. "I will arrange discreet protection, warriors loyal to your bloodline who can watch this cottage without drawing attention. But your Majesty, you must understand, the longer you remain hidden here, the greater the risk grows that Alaric's scouts stumble upon this location by chance rather than design. We are working against time in more ways than one." The weight of Odette's words settled heavily over the small room, the fragile safety Elena and Kellen had carefully constructed suddenly feeling far more precarious than she had allowed herself to fully acknowledge. She glanced toward her sleeping children, fear tightening around her heart at the thought of danger creeping steadily closer with every passing day. "What would you have us do?" Elena asked quietly, "to protect them properly?" Odette studied her for a long moment before answering, her tone measured and careful. "Trust very few. Change nothing about your routine that might draw suspicion. And prepare yourselves, both of you, for the possibility that hiding may soon no longer be an option at all." The three of them spoke long into the night, planning carefully, weighing options that grew more limited with each new detail Odette revealed about Alaric's growing influence throughout the northern territories. By the time Odette finally departed before dawn, promising to return within days with further news, Elena felt the fragile peace of the past week crumbling steadily away, replaced by a tense, watchful readiness that she suspected would only intensify as the true danger drew nearer. Kellen remained silent for a long while after Odette's departure, staring into the dying fire, his expression heavy with worry he no longer bothered hiding from her. "I am sorry," he said finally, "for bringing this danger to your door." "You did not bring it," Elena replied firmly, moving to sit beside him. "Alaric brought it, the moment he chose ambition over loyalty. We will face it together, Kellen, whatever comes." He turned to look at her, something fierce and grateful burning behind his dark eyes, and for a moment, despite the danger gathering steadily around them, Elena felt a flicker of the same undeniable connection that had drawn her to him 5 years ago. Stronger now, tempered by shared purpose and mutual understanding neither of them had possessed back then. Outside, the wind stirred restlessly through the trees, carrying with it the distant, unshakable sense that whatever peace remained to them was rapidly running out. 3 days after Odette's visit, a merchant arrived in the small village nearest Elena's cottage, setting up a modest stall selling fine cloth and rare spices at the weekly market. He was polite, well-spoken, and quick to strike up friendly conversation with anyone who approached his stand, yet something about his careful, searching gaze set Elena on edge the moment she first noticed him from across the square. She had come to purchase thread for mending, the twins trailing close beside her, when the merchant's attention settled directly on her with unmistakable interest. "A fine day for the market," he said pleasantly, his eyes flicking briefly toward Leo and Vera before returning to Elena's face. "You must be Elena, the maid from Ellery Manor. I have heard your household keeps excellent staff." Elena's stomach tightened, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Word travels quickly in small villages," she replied evenly. "Indeed it does," the merchant agreed, his smile never wavering, though his eyes remained sharp and assessing. "I hear you have also taken in a traveler recently, recovering from some unfortunate injury, I understand." The careful casualness of his tone did nothing to disguise the deliberate nature of his question. Elena's pulse quickened, every instinct screaming caution, though she forced herself to respond with practiced calm. "A distant relative," she said smoothly. "Nothing of particular interest, I am afraid." The merchant's smile sharpened slightly at the corners, and Elena felt certain, with sudden cold clarity, that he did not believe her explanation in the slightest. "Of course," he said politely. "Forgive my curiosity. Travelers passing through these parts always draw a certain amount of interest, particularly ones who seem to vanish so completely from view." She purchased her thread quickly and ushered the children away, her heart pounding with barely contained alarm. By the time she reached the edge of the market, she had already decided to abandon her remaining errands entirely, hurrying home along the winding road with Leo and Vera struggling to keep pace with her rapid steps. Kellen noticed her distress the moment she burst through the cottage door, his expression shifting instantly to sharp alertness. "What happened?" "A merchant," Elena said breathlessly, setting down her basket with shaking hands. "At the market. He asked about you directly, Kellen. He knew about the traveler recovering at my cottage." Kellen's expression darkened considerably. "Describe him." She did so quickly, detailing his appearance, his careful probing questions, the way his sharp eyes had lingered too long on her children's faces. As she spoke, Kellen's jaw tightened further, recognition flickering behind his dark eyes. "Dorian," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "One of Alaric's most trusted enforcers, skilled at gathering information without revealing his true purpose. If he has found this village, it means Alaric's search has narrowed considerably." Fear coiled tightly around Elena's heart. "What do we do?" "I need to see him myself," Kellen said, already moving toward the door with grim determination. "Discreetly, without revealing my presence directly. I must know how much he suspects before deciding how to proceed." "Kellen, it is too dangerous," Elena protested, catching his arm. "If he recognizes you." "He will not," Kellen said firmly, though his expression softened slightly at her obvious worry. "I know how to move unseen when necessary, Elena. Trust me in this." Reluctantly, she released his arm, watching with barely concealed anxiety as he slipped out into the gathering dusk, moving with the same fluid, predatory grace she had witnessed the night Odette arrived. She busied herself preparing dinner for the children, though her mind remained entirely fixed on Kellen's safety, every passing minute stretching unbearably long. He returned nearly an hour later, his expression grim but controlled. "Dorian is indeed searching for me," he confirmed once the children were occupied with their meal. "Though I do not believe he has confirmed my exact location yet, his questions at the market were general, testing for information rather than acting on certainty." "But he will keep searching," Elena said, dread settling heavily in her stomach. "Yes," Kellen admitted, "which means we cannot remain here much longer without significant risk. Odette promised protection, but I fear events are moving faster than any of us anticipated." That night, after the children were finally asleep, a soft knock came at the door once more, the same coded phrase from before granting entry to Odette, who arrived alone this time, her expression tense with urgency that immediately put Elena on edge. "Dorian has been spotted in 3 separate villages within the past week," Odette reported without preamble, her voice low and clipped. "Alaric has expanded his search considerably. I fear it is only a matter of time before he narrows his focus to this specific area." "We know," Kellen said grimly. "Dorian questioned Elena directly at the market today." Odette's expression tightened further. "Then we have less time than I hoped. Your Majesty, I strongly advise relocating to a more secure position, somewhere my most trusted warriors can properly protect you and your family." until we can safely address Alaric's rebellion directly. Elena's heart clenched at the word family, spoken so naturally by Odette, as though the truth of their connection required no further explanation. Kellen glanced toward her, silent question in his eyes, seeking her agreement, before committing to such a significant decision. Where would we go? Elena asked quietly. A secure holding several days' travel from here, Odette explained. Remote enough to avoid casual discovery, yet close enough to my network of loyal warriors that proper protection can be arranged quickly. It will not be comfortable, not immediately, but it offers far greater safety than remaining here, where Alaric's forces circle ever closer. Elena glanced toward the corner where her children slept, weighing the terrifying uncertainty of uprooting their entire lives against the growing danger of remaining stationary while enemies searched relentlessly nearby. Finally, she nodded slowly. If it keeps them safe, she said, then we go. Relief flickered across Kellen's face, quickly replaced by renewed determination. How soon can preparations be arranged? 2 days, Odette said. I will need that time to ensure the route remains secure and unwatched. Until then, remain cautious. Avoid the market entirely if possible, and keep the children close. After Odette departed once more into the darkness, Kellen turned to Elena, his expression troubled despite the plan now taking shape. I am asking you to abandon everything familiar, he said quietly. Your position at the estate, your home, the only life you have known these past years. I would understand entirely if you resented me for placing you in such a position. I do not resent you, Elena said firmly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I resent Alaric for threatening children who have done nothing except exist. Whatever sacrifices this requires, Kellen, I will make them, for their safety and, I am beginning to realize, for the chance at a future where we are not constantly looking over our shoulders. Kellen reached out slowly, his fingers brushing gently against her hand, a silent question in the gesture that Elena did not pull away from. Whatever happens next, he said softly, know that I intend to spend the rest of my life earning back the years I lost with you and our children, whatever it takes. Elena's heart tightened at his words, 5 years of hurt and longing tangling together with the fragile hope now blooming steadily within her chest. Then let us survive first, she said quietly, though a small smile touched her lips despite the danger surrounding them, and worry about the rest afterward. Outside, the night remained quiet, deceptively peaceful, though both of them understood clearly now that danger crept steadily closer with each passing hour, and that the 2 days remaining before their planned departure would likely prove the most perilous they had faced yet. The following morning brought an uneasy calm, the cottage feeling smaller and more fragile than ever as Elena moved through her final day of work at the estate before their planned departure. She had informed Grace Ellery only that a family emergency required her to leave her position, offering no further explanation despite the older woman's obvious curiosity. You have been a good worker, Elena, Grace said, studying her with an expression that held more warmth than Elena had expected. Whatever trouble you find yourself in, I hope you find safety on the other side of it. Thank you, ma'am, Elena said, genuinely touched despite the circumstances. I am sorry to leave so suddenly. Grace waved off the apology with a brief gesture. Family comes first. Always has, always will. She hesitated, then added more quietly, that stranger of yours. Whoever he truly is, I hope he understands what he has in you. Elena's cheeks warmed, uncertain how much Grace had guessed about the true nature of Kellen's identity, though the older woman's knowing expression suggested she understood far more than she let on. She said nothing further, simply thanking Grace once more before departing the estate for what she suspected would be the final time. The walk home felt different that day, every shadow beneath the trees seeming to hold potential danger, every distant sound making her pulse quicken with sudden alarm. By the time she reached her cottage, relief flooded through her at the sight of Kellen waiting calmly in the doorway, Leo and Vera playing safely nearby. Everything is prepared, Kellen said once she drew close enough to hear. Odette sent word this morning. We depart at first light tomorrow. Elena nodded, relief mingling with anxiety at the thought of the journey ahead. The children will need to be told something, she said. They cannot understand the full truth yet, but they deserve some explanation for such a sudden change. That evening after dinner, Kellen knelt before the twins, his expression carefully gentle despite the gravity of what he needed to explain. Leo, Vera, he began softly. Tomorrow we are going to take a journey together, to a new home where you will be very safe and very happy. Vera tilted her head curiously. Are you coming too, Papa? The words slipped out so naturally that Kellen's breath caught visibly, his eyes flickering briefly toward Elena before he answered, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer fully hide. Yes, he said softly. I am coming too, and I intend to stay with you both for a very long time. Leo studied his father with the same serious intensity he brought to everything, then nodded decisively, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Will there be more birds to carve? He asked. A genuine laugh escaped Kellen, warm and unguarded, momentarily dispelling the tension that had gripped the cottage for days. As many birds as you wish, he promised. That night, as the children finally slept, exhausted from the excitement of anticipated travel, Elena and Kellen sat together near the dying fire, both too anxious to seek rest themselves despite the early departure awaiting them. Thank you, Elena said quietly, for being patient with them, for letting Vera call you Papa without correction. I could not deny it any longer, Kellen admitted softly. Nor did I wish to. They are the truest, most precious thing I have ever known, Elena, and I intend to spend whatever life remains to me, proving myself worthy of that title. Elena studied his face in the firelight, searching for any trace of the careful, guarded stranger she had dragged from the forest just weeks before, finding instead only open sincerity and quiet determination. Something in her chest loosened slightly, the last remnants of old hurt beginning, cautiously, to heal. A sudden sharp knock at the door shattered the peaceful moment entirely. Kellen was on his feet instantly, every trace of warmth replaced by fierce alertness, positioning himself protectively between the door and Elena. Who is it? He called sharply, voice low and dangerous in a way Elena had not heard before. Silence answered him, heavy and deliberate. Kellen's eyes narrowed, his entire body coiling with tension as he moved cautiously toward the shuttered window, peering carefully through the narrow gap. Whatever he saw made his expression harden further. Elena, he said quietly, urgency threading sharply through his voice. Wake the children. Now. Fear seized her instantly, but she did not hesitate, moving quickly to rouse Leo and Vera from sleep, gathering them close despite their sleepy confusion. What is happening? She whispered, even as she worked. Dorian, Kellen said grimly, still watching through the gap in the shutters. He has found us. Elena's blood ran cold. How? It does not matter now, Kellen said, moving swiftly to bar the door more securely, though his expression suggested he understood such measures would offer only temporary protection at best. We need to leave immediately, through the back path Odette mentioned, before he brings reinforcements. The children, now fully awake and sensing the sudden fear gripping their mother, began to whimper softly, confused and frightened by the tense urgency surrounding them. Elena forced herself to remain calm, gathering a few essential belongings with quick, practiced efficiency, while Kellen continued monitoring the area outside. He is alone for now, Kellen reported, relief evident despite the continued tension in his voice. But he will not remain so for long. We move now, quietly, through the back. They slipped out through the rear window Kellen had quietly unlatched, moving swiftly into the darkened trees behind the cottage, Elena carrying Vera while Kellen carried Leo, both children clinging tightly despite their confusion and fear. The night was thick with shadows, every rustle of leaves sending fresh spikes of terror through Elena's chest. Where are we going? She whispered as they hurried along a narrow path she had never noticed before, clearly known intimately to Kellen despite his supposed unfamiliarity with the area. A safe house, he replied quietly, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding darkness. Odette established it in case exactly this situation arose. We are close. They pressed on through the trees, the sounds of the forest suddenly seeming far more menacing than they ever had before, every shadow potentially hiding danger. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, came the distant sound of raised voices, someone discovering the empty cottage and calling out in obvious alarm. Faster, Kellen urged quietly, adjusting his grip on Leo as they hastened their pace. They emerged finally into a small clearing where a modest stone structure stood hidden among dense trees, clearly built for exactly this kind of emergency. Kellen knocked in a specific pattern against the door, which opened almost instantly to reveal Odette, her expression tense with obvious relief at seeing them arrive safely. Inside, quickly, she urged, ushering them through the doorway before securing it firmly behind them. Dorian discovered the cottage sooner than we anticipated. We have very little time before he expands his search into these woods. Elena set Vera down gently, her heart still racing from their hurried escape, watching as Kellen did the same with Leo, both children finally beginning to calm slightly within the relative safety of the stone walls surrounding them. What now? Elena asked, exhaustion and fear tangling together in her voice. Kellen's expression was grim but resolute as he turned to face her fully. Now, he said quietly, I stop running. It is time Alaric understood exactly who he has been hunting, and exactly what price awaits him for threatening my family. Odette's eyes widened slightly at his words, clear concern flickering across her features. Your Majesty, revealing yourself now, without proper preparation, has become unavoidable, Kellen interrupted firmly. Dorian will report our location regardless of what we do next. Better Alaric learns the truth from my own actions than from rumors twisted to suit his ambitions. Elena studied his face, seeing there the unmistakable transformation from wounded traveler to the powerful king he had always truly been, resolve hardening every line of his expression. Whatever came next, she understood clearly now that the careful secrecy protecting them these past weeks had finally, irrevocably, run its course. The safe house held its breath through what remained of the night. 4 walls of solid stone, offering fragile comfort against the danger gathered somewhere beyond the trees. Elena sat with the twins curled against her, finally settled back into uneasy sleep despite the chaos of their sudden flight, while Kellen and Odette spoke in low, urgent tones near the small hearth. Sending word of your survival to the loyal packs will take time to organize properly, Odette said quietly. But if Dorian has already reported your location to Alaric, we may not have that luxury. Then we do not wait, Kellen replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority Elena had come to recognize as entirely different from the gentle, careful man who carved wooden birds for his children. Send riders to every territory bordering these woods. I want my survival known before Alaric can twist the narrative any further. Odette nodded, already moving toward the door. I will handle it personally. Stay hidden until you hear from me again. Once she departed into the darkness, Kellen turned to find Elena watching him quietly from across the small room, her expression unreadable in the dim firelight. He crossed to sit beside her, careful not to disturb the sleeping children nestled against her side. You are frightened, he said softly. It was not a question. Terrified, Elena admitted honestly. Not of you, Kellen. Of everything surrounding you. Of a world where children can become targets simply for existing. Where a man I once loved without any knowledge of his true identity now carries a title that apparently invites this much danger. Kellen's expression softened with something like sorrow. I never wished for any of this to touch you. If I could undo the danger my existence brings to your door, I would surrender every ounce of power I hold without hesitation. I know, Elena said quietly. But that is precisely why I cannot fully resent you for it, Kellen. You never chose this burden. It chose you. The same way it seems fate keeps choosing to bring us back together despite every obstacle standing between us. He reached for her hand hesitantly, relief washing across his features when she did not pull away. Whatever happens with Alaric, he said quietly, I need you to understand something clearly. I did not return to your life merely to reclaim my children as heirs to a throne. I returned because some part of me never stopped loving you, even across 5 years and countless miles of separation. Elena's breath caught, old hurt and fresh hope tangling together painfully in her chest. You have a strange way of showing devotion, vanishing without explanation for half a decade. I know, Kellen said, guilt heavy in his voice, and I understand if trust cannot be rebuilt so easily, if at all. But know that whatever choice you make about your future, about whether you wish to remain part of the world I come from, I will respect it completely. I only ask that you allow me the chance to prove, through actions rather than words, that I am worthy of a second chance. Silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unresolved, until a sudden pounding at the door shattered the fragile peace entirely. Kellen was on his feet instantly, positioning himself protectively as the children startled awake, frightened whimpers filling the small room. It is Odette, came a familiar voice, urgent and breathless. Open quickly. Kellen unbarred the door immediately, revealing Odette's disheveled appearance, her expression grave with barely contained alarm. Alaric knows, she said without preamble. Dorian reported your location hours ago. Scouts are already moving through these woods, searching for this exact safe house. Elena's heart dropped, fear seizing her chest as she gathered the frightened twins closer. How much time do we have? Very little, Odette admitted grimly. Perhaps an hour, if we are fortunate. I have sent riders to every loyal territory, but reinforcements will not arrive in time to help us here. Kellen's jaw tightened with fierce determination, the last traces of hesitation vanishing entirely from his expression. Then I face them directly, he said firmly. Better to confront Alaric's scouts here, on my own terms, than allow them to corner us further with nowhere left to retreat. Your Majesty, you are not yet at full strength, Odette protested, though her tone carried resignation rather than genuine hope of changing his mind. Facing them alone. I will not be alone, Kellen interrupted, his gaze sweeping toward Elena and the children with fierce protectiveness. I fight for something far more important than territory or title tonight. I fight for my family. Elena's throat tightened with fear and something fiercer, something that felt remarkably like pride despite the terror gripping her heart. "What can I do?" she asked, refusing to simply stand aside while danger closed in around them. "Take the children deeper into the woods," Kellen instructed quickly, already moving toward the door with purposeful strides. "Odette knows a hidden path leading toward the eastern border, where loyal warriors patrol regularly. Get them to safety. Whatever happens here, protecting them remains the only priority that matters." "And you?" Elena demanded, fear sharp in her voice despite her best efforts to remain steady for the children's sake. Kellen turned back briefly, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that stole her breath entirely. "I will find you," he promised quietly. "I did not survive Alaric's first attempt on my life, only to fail protecting the family I have only just begun to know. Trust me, Elena, one final time." Before she could respond further, distant sounds began drifting through the trees outside, the unmistakable crash of underbrush being disturbed by rapidly approaching movement. Odette's expression tightened with urgency. "We must move now," she said firmly, already guiding Elena and the frightened twins toward a narrow opening at the rear of the stone structure that Elena had not noticed before, cleverly concealed behind stacked firewood. Elena hesitated only a moment longer, torn between the instinct to remain beside Kellen and the desperate need to protect her children, before finally allowing Odette to usher her and the twins through the hidden passage into the darkness beyond. The last glimpse she caught of Kellen showed him standing tall and resolute near the entrance, his silhouette outlined faintly by the dim firelight, every inch the powerful king he had spent weeks carefully hiding beneath the guise of a wounded traveler. "Stay strong," she whispered to herself, gripping her children's hands tightly as Odette led them swiftly through the darkened trees, the sounds of approaching danger growing steadily louder behind them. Whatever confrontation awaited Kellen within those stone walls, Elena understood with sudden, terrible clarity that the fate of everything she had rebuilt these past weeks now rested entirely on the outcome of a battle she could not witness. Praying desperately that the man she had once nursed back to health from near death would survive long enough to fulfill the promise he had made to find her again. Behind them, faint but unmistakable, the first sounds of confrontation began echoing through the quiet forest, sharp and violent enough to send fresh terror racing through Elena's veins even as she forced herself to keep moving forward, deeper into the concealing darkness. Her children's safety the only thought she allowed herself to hold on to through the fear threatening to overwhelm her entirely. The hidden path wound steadily eastward through dense trees, Odette moving with swift confidence despite the darkness, Elena following close behind with Leo and Vera clutched tightly against her sides. Behind them, the sounds of confrontation continued, distant shouts, and the crash of movement through underbrush painting a terrifying picture of whatever battle Kellen now faced alone. "Almost there," Odette murmured, guiding them around a fallen log with practiced ease. "The Eastern Border Patrol should be within reach soon." Vera whimpered softly, clearly frightened despite Elena's efforts to remain calm for her children's sake.
"Is Papa going to be all right?"
she asked in a small, trembling voice. "Your father is very strong," Elena said firmly, forcing confidence into her tone despite the fear gripping her own heart. "Stronger than you can imagine, sweetheart." They pressed on through the trees, the sounds of conflict slowly fading behind them, replaced by an unnerving silence that felt somehow more ominous than the noise had been. Elena's mind raced with worry, imagining countless terrible possibilities, refusing to allow herself to consider the worst even as fear threatened to overwhelm her completely. Suddenly, movement flickered at the edge of the path ahead, and Odette froze instantly, one hand raised in warning. Elena's heart lurched with fresh terror as a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and clearly dangerous, moving with the same unnatural grace she had witnessed in Kellen. "Going somewhere?" The voice was smooth, almost pleasant, though laced with unmistakable menace. Elena recognized him instantly despite the darkness. "Dorian." "Stand aside," Odette commanded sharply, positioning herself protectively in front of Elena and the children. "You have no authority here." Dorian's laugh was cold and humorless. "Authority belongs to whoever holds the power to claim it, Odette. And soon enough, that will be Alaric alone, once his true heir problem has been properly addressed." His gaze slid meaningfully toward the twins, and Elena's blood ran cold with understanding, pulling her children instinctively closer against her body. "You will not touch them," she said fiercely, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "Brave words," Dorian said, taking a slow step closer. "From someone with absolutely no ability to stop me." Odette shifted subtly, and Elena caught the barest glimpse of something fierce and dangerous flashing behind the older woman's eyes, a warning that whatever ordinary appearance she carried concealed considerable strength of her own. You would be wise to reconsider, Odette said quietly, her voice carrying quiet authority. I have served this bloodline for over 20 years, Dorian. I did not survive this long by being unprepared for exactly this kind of confrontation. For a tense moment, neither moved, the standoff stretching taut with danger. Then, from somewhere behind them, a powerful voice cut through the darkness, unmistakable and commanding. Step away from my family, Dorian, or face consequences you will not survive. Kellen emerged from the trees, his clothing torn and his expression fierce, though he moved with none of the weakness that had defined him during his recovery. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely her knees nearly buckled, though she forced herself to remain steady for her children's sake. Dorian's confident expression flickered with sudden uncertainty. You should be dealing with Alaric's forces at the safe house. Alaric's forces, Kellen replied grimly, have been dealt with. Your master's plans crumble further with every passing hour, Dorian. I suggest you consider very carefully whether continuing to serve him remains a wise choice. For a long moment Dorian hesitated, clearly weighing his options, before something in Kellen's unwavering confidence apparently convinced him the odds had shifted unfavorably. With a final calculating glance toward Elena and the children, he melted back into the shadows and disappeared, choosing retreat over a confrontation he no longer seemed confident of winning. Elena released a shaky breath, relief and lingering fear tangling together as Kellen closed the distance between them quickly, gathering all three of them into a fierce, protective embrace. You are safe, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. All of you, safe. What happened at the safe house? Elena asked once she trusted her voice to remain steady. Alaric sent only a small scouting party, Kellen explained, his expression grim despite the relief evident in his posture. Overconfident, believing me still weakened from my injuries. They underestimated me severely, and their defeat should send a clear message throughout the territories that I remain very much alive and capable of defending my throne. Odette's expression remained cautious despite the apparent victory. This is only a temporary reprieve, Your Majesty. Alaric will not accept this defeat quietly. He will regroup, gather greater numbers, and attempt something far more decisive. I know, Kellen agreed, his jaw tightening with renewed determination. Which is precisely why we must move quickly now, while his forces remain scattered and disorganized. It is time I returned properly to my territory, reclaimed my throne openly, and ended Alaric's rebellion entirely before he has opportunity to regroup. Elena studied his face, seeing there the full weight of the responsibility he carried, the burden of leadership he had spent weeks trying to shield her and the children from entirely. Then we go with you, she said firmly. All of us, together. Kellen's eyes softened with something like wonder, as though her unwavering support still surprised him despite everything they had faced together these past weeks. Are you certain? Once we return to my territory, once your presence becomes known publicly, there will be no simple retreat back to ordinary life afterward. I stopped wanting an ordinary life, Elena said quietly, the moment fate dragged you back into mine, wounded and bleeding in that forest. Whatever comes next, Kellen, I choose to face it standing beside you, not hidden away pretending none of this ever happened. Something fierce and grateful blazed behind Kellen's dark eyes as he reached for her hand, weaving his fingers through hers with quiet, unshakable determination. Then let us end this properly, he said firmly, and reclaim the life that rightfully belongs to all of us. Odette nodded approvingly, already turning to lead them onward through the trees toward the eastern border, where loyal warriors would provide proper escort back to the heart of Kellen's territory. As they walked, Leo tugged gently on his father's sleeve, curiosity overcoming his earlier fear now that immediate danger had passed. Papa, he asked seriously, are we really going to live somewhere new? Kellen glanced down at his son with a warmth that had grown steadily more natural over these past weeks. Yes, he said softly. Somewhere that has been waiting for you and your sister for a very long time, though neither of you knew it existed until now. Will there be more animals to see there? Vera asked hopefully, apparently more interested in practical matters than the weighty political implications surrounding their sudden change in circumstances. A genuine laugh escaped Kellen, momentarily lightening the tension that had gripped them all throughout the harrowing night. More than you could possibly imagine, he promised. As they continued their careful journey through the dark forest, dawn beginning to paint faint streaks of gray light across the eastern sky, Elena allowed herself, finally, a small measure of hope. The danger surrounding them remained far from over, Alaric's rebellion still very much alive and threatening, but for the first time since she had discovered Kellen bleeding in the storm weeks before, she felt something solid and unshakable settling into place. Whatever challenges awaited them in the territory they now traveled toward, She understood clearly that she would face every single one of them beside the man who had somehow found his way back into her heart, and beside the children who represented everything worth fighting for in the uncertain days ahead. 3 days of careful travel brought them at last to the edge of Kellen's territory, a landscape unlike anything Elena had ever witnessed, mountains rising sharply against a pale sky, ancient forests stretching endlessly in every direction, and nestled among it all, a grand stone fortress that seemed to grow directly from the mountainside itself. Loyal warriors had joined their party along the way, their numbers swelling steadily as word of Kellen's survival spread through the surrounding territories, relief and renewed loyalty evident on every face that greeted their king. "Home," Kellen said quietly as they approached the fortress gates, his voice carrying a complicated mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. "Or what will become home, if you both are willing to accept it." Elena studied the imposing structure, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the world Kellen truly belonged to, so entirely different from the quiet, simple cottage she had called home for years. Beside her, Leo and Vera stared with wide-eyed wonder, apparently far less troubled by the dramatic change in circumstances than their mother. "It is beautiful," Elena admitted softly, though uncertainty still lingered beneath her words. Kellen squeezed her hand gently, sensing her hesitation. "It will take time to adjust," he said. "I do not expect you to feel at home immediately. But I promise, whatever fears you carry about this world, I will do everything within my power to make certain you and the children feel safe and valued here." Their arrival within the fortress walls prompted immediate activity, servants and warriors alike gathering to witness their king's triumphant return. Odette moved efficiently among them, organizing proper arrangements for Elena and the children while Kellen addressed his assembled people directly, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard with the natural authority of someone born to lead. "I stand before you today," he announced, "alive despite Alaric's attempts to see me destroyed, and more determined than ever to root out the corruption threatening to tear our territories apart. I return not alone, but with my family beside me, the woman who saved my life and the children who represent the future of our bloodline." A murmur swept through the gathered crowd, curiosity and cautious approval evident on many faces as they studied Elena and the twins with open interest. Elena straightened her shoulders, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of so much attention, understanding instinctively that whatever uncertainty she carried privately, presenting confidence publicly, mattered greatly in this new world she now found herself part of. The following days passed in a blur of adjustment, Elena and the children slowly settling into unfamiliar routines within the fortress, while Kellen worked tirelessly to consolidate support among the wavering territories, using diplomacy and firm resolve in equal measure to counter the lies Alaric had spread during his absence. Odette remained a steady, patient guide throughout, helping Elena navigate the complicated politics and traditions of a world entirely foreign to everything she had known before. Nearly 2 weeks after their arrival, word finally came that Alaric, having lost the support of nearly every territory following his failed scouting mission and Kellen's triumphant return, had fled north with only a small handful of loyal followers, his rebellion effectively broken beyond any hope of meaningful recovery. The relief that swept through the fortress was palpable, tension easing from every corner as the immediate threat finally, truly passed. That evening, Kellen found Elena standing alone on a balcony overlooking the mountains, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. She turned as he approached, offering a small, tired smile. "It is over," she said softly. "Truly over." "For now," Kellen agreed, coming to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the same breathtaking view. "Alaric may attempt to rebuild his influence eventually, but his power is thoroughly broken. We have time now, Elena, time to properly build the life we both deserve." She turned to study his profile, the strong lines of his face illuminated by the fading sunlight, remembering suddenly the wounded, desperate stranger she had dragged through the storm weeks before, hardly recognizing him now as the same powerful, confident king standing beside her. "Kellen," she said quietly, "these past weeks have changed everything I thought I understood about my life, about the world, about you. I came here uncertain whether I truly belonged in this place, whether I could ever feel as though I fit within your world. And now?" he asked, searching her face with quiet hope. "Now," Elena said softly, "I understand that home is not simply a place. It is wherever my children are safe, and wherever the people I love stand beside me." She paused, gathering her courage before continuing. "I choose this life, Kellen. I choose you, fully and completely, not because fate forced this path upon us, but because I genuinely wish to build a future here, together." Kellen's breath caught visibly, emotion overwhelming his careful composure as he reached for her hands, holding them gently within his own. "Then allow me to ask properly," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "Something I should have asked 5 years ago, had circumstances allowed it. Elena, will you stand beside me not merely as the mother of my children, but as my equal, my Luna, ruling these territories together for as long as we both shall live?" Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, happiness overwhelming the lingering fears and uncertainties that had shadowed her these past weeks. "Yes," she whispered. Then more firmly, "Yes, Kellen, I will." He drew her close, and for a moment neither spoke, simply standing together in comfortable silence as the last light of sunset faded gently into evening. Somewhere within the fortress, Leo and Vera's laughter carried faintly on the evening breeze, playing happily with newfound friends among the warriors' children, utterly unaware of how completely their lives had changed, yet thriving regardless within this new world their parents had fought so hard to secure for them. In the weeks that followed, Elena settled fully into her role, learning the customs and responsibilities expected of a Luna with steady determination, earning the respect and affection of Kellen's people through her genuine warmth and unwavering strength. The twins flourished within the fortress walls, growing steadily more comfortable with their identity, as heirs to a legacy neither of them had known existed just months before, their father delighting in every small moment he had once feared he would never experience. Alaric's threat, though diminished, would likely never disappear entirely, a shadow lingering at the edges of their otherwise peaceful existence. But Elena had learned, through everything she had survived these past months, that true safety came not from the absence of danger, but from facing whatever challenges arose with unwavering strength, and the people she loved, standing firmly beside her. Years later, when Leo and Vera grew old enough to understand fully the remarkable story of how their parents found their way back to each other, Elena would tell them of a storm, a wounded stranger, and a choice she never once regretted making, despite every danger that choice had invited into her life. She would tell them of courage discovered in the darkest moments, of love rebuilt from years of separation and hurt, and of a family forged through hardship into something unbreakable. And every single time she told that story, Kellen would watch her with the same quiet wonder he had carried since the moment he first opened his eyes and found her kneeling beside him in the firelight, grateful beyond words that fate, in its mysterious wisdom, had chosen to bring them back together, wounded and uncertain, yet destined all along to build something extraordinary from the ashes of everything they had once lost.